I wanted to start by just focusing on the notion of social justice. What do we understand by social justice in general? And I was thinking of separating it into two separate ideas of social justice. One is the de jure kind of formulation, which you see in policy documents and which governments like to set forth. So equal rights and freedoms as set out in our constitution, equal access to resources, equal access to opportunities, equal access to political and public spaces, equality of treatment under the law. So all of these things that are laid out in our legal frameworks and constitution and so forth are expressions or intentions of social justice. But the other understanding of social justice, which I think most of us in movements approach social justice from that perspective, which is the de facto, actually in life, how do people experience these ideas, very, grand ideas like equal access, equal respect, equal treatment under the law, equality of rights and opportunities, and so on. So when we look at the way in which these notions of social justice are understood by people in reality, it translates in a somewhat different way. If all these ideas of social justice that were set out in laws were to become reality, then our vision is that everybody would experience respect, would experience dignity, would be recognized for their identity as human beings, would be recognized for their contributions, would have safety and security, would be protected from violence, would be able to achieve their aspirations, and would not experience exclusion, oppression, discrimination, subordination, all of these. So I think from the movement perspective, we approach social justice from the notion of not what is written in the law or what is written in the constitution, but from the notion of, do people actually feel that they have achieved their aspirations for social justice? So this is how I, as a part of women's movements, understand social justice, or let's say understand one aspect of social justice, which is gender equality. I mean, we know that what is written in the constitution, what is written in the laws, what is written in various policies is translated in a very different way on the ground. On the ground, what you see and what people experience does not give us any confidence that there is a level playing field for everybody. So what we encounter, the daily reality that we see in the field, is a context that is completely shaped by these intersecting hierarchies of power and privilege. And this notion of intersecting hierarchies is something that feminist activism and feminist theorization has given to the field of social justice. So what we see is that discrimination is never on a single axis. So when we talk about caste discrimination, embedded within our conversation of caste discrimination are primarily discrimination on the basis of patriarchy and discrimination on the basis of class as well. So class, caste, and patriarchy are in a sense codependent systems. This whole notion of Brahminical patriarchy, which is something that Indian feminists have given and have theorized, we have seen that caste cannot exist without gender hierarchy and patriarchal hierarchies. Equally, we have seen that patriarchy cannot exist without the presence of caste. So we know that both patriarchy and caste are basically systems based on the exploitation and control of women's reproductive power and women's sexuality. The entire system of caste depends on this idea that marriages and relationships should take place within the caste. And if you look outwards to caste hierarchies, economic hierarchies, then you see that, as Dr. Ambedkar said, caste is not just a system of division of labor, as many privileged people explain it, as many of our policies explain it, that, oh, this is just a separation of different kinds of work. Caste is not just a system of separation of labor, it is a system of separation of laborers. It is a system of dividing people based on the assumption that certain people are suitable to certain occupations, and of maintaining these hierarchies and divisions by controlling women's sexuality and reproductive power. So the caste system is dependent on protecting this idea of marriage as something that should happen only within the caste. So long before laws like love jihad and prevention of conversion and prevention of love jihad came into operation, the idea that marriage outside the caste is something very dangerous that needs to be prevented was very much there in our society. And we know that caste and patriarchy operated together to punish both women and men who stepped out of this box of caste and patriarchy. So the idea of which caste can marry which caste is very much shows you the hierarchy of patriarchy. So traditionally within the Hindu religion, people belonging to upper caste, men belonging to upper caste can marry women, can have sexual relationships with women of lower caste. Women belonging to upper caste are punished if they have any relationship, sexual relationship with men of lower caste. And it's obviously so-called lower caste and upper caste. So it is obviously a mechanism to preserve the hierarchy, to preserve the control, to preserve the property ownership and preserve the privilege among those of these privileged castes. And what we see in India throughout the ages, and all the more so today, we see a clear hierarchy of inequality, economic inequality, social inequality, cultural inequality, determined by caste and patriarchy acting together. And the name of the system, the term that we use for this system is Brahminical patriarchy, because the norms of what is acceptable are essentially norms which were laid down by those who were powerful within the caste hierarchy. And this most powerful in the caste hierarchy is the notion of Brahminism. So Brahminical patriarchy as a term doesn't mean that Brahmins control patriarchy. It simply means that the norms have been set by those who are powerful, powerful in terms of caste, in terms of class, and not only caste and class. Because we know that even though caste is something concocted by the Hindu religion, it runs across religions in India. So we see caste among Christian communities, We see caste among Muslim communities. We see caste among communities belonging to other religions also. So that idea of domination and control through dominating and controlling the reproductive power of women is very, very central to the injustices perpetrated in our society. So social justice, by definition, is an effort to challenge and transform all the injustices based on caste, based on class, based on minority-majority status, based on religion, based on where you come from in the country, based on rural or urban. All of these hierarchies are basically the basis and foundation of social injustice. So I would prefer to use the term caste injustice, gender injustice, class injustice, rather than merely discrimination. Because as people who are concerned about social justice, it is more meaningful to us to look at the injustices within these hierarchies rather than merely discrimination. So what are the injustices? I mean, I'm taking the example of caste system because that is what is most familiar to us. And that is where you can see the connivance and the intersection of patriarchy and class and religion in reproducing and sustaining the caste system. So on the ground, what do we see? Within every institution, whether it is institutions of the state, whether it is institutions of civil society, we see the privileged classes occupying the top positions in those institutions and bodies. We see blatant caste discrimination in the form of humiliation, subjugation, violence, and subordination within the system of education. I mean, we have seen even in a state like Tamil Nadu, where the political ethos is one of social justice and Dravidian political culture. A recent survey showed that 30% of schools in Tamil Nadu practice horrible forms of caste discrimination, like, for example, getting Dalit children to clean the toilet, forcing Dalit children to use a separate source of water, punishing Dalit children by sending them out of class, keeping them out of the classroom for a big period of the lesson, using casteist abuses. 30% of schools in Tamil Nadu, and not only Tamil Nadu, in Kerala, in West Bengal, these are all supposedly the progressive states which have been ruled by left ideology for long periods of time. We see right at the school level, we see these injustices against Dalit children, against Adivasi children. And I'm sure all of us in this room have personal experience of seeing these injustices or trying to fight against these injustices. And they can be very blatant and cruel. In Kerala, schools run by the Tribal Development Agency for tribal children. With the budget that is given to these schools, they buy toys and teaching aids. They buy books for the library. And we have seen, I mean, I've seen in Adivasi schools, these things are kept in a locked box. And the children are not allowed to play with them. The children are not allowed to use them because they say, these are children from the jungle. They won't know how to use these things. So only if somebody from outside comes to see the school, these things are taken out and displayed in the classroom. So it is a discrimination practiced on the basis of an assumption that Dalit children will not be able to respect these things. But what it does actually is affect the teaching and affect the learning of Dalit children. So the toys and games which make it easy for children to learn are kept away from them. And at the end of their education, people make fun and say, what was the use? These Dalit children went to school for 12 years, but they still have not learned anything. So it is an injustice and it is a direct violation of the right to equal opportunity, the right to access processes and spaces. So at every step, you see such injustices perpetrated. And the sad thing is that it is not only people belonging to the privileged class and caste who perpetrate these injustices. It's a very sad but true fact that many people who themselves belong to the disprivileged class collude in these injustices, if not perpetuate them themselves. So we have seen in cases where violence, a Dalit woman or Dalit girl comes to complain about violence that has been perpetrated on her, we have seen Dalit groups also saying, what did she do? What did she do to attract the violence? Why did she do this? Why did she do that? And so on. So the reason for my saying this is this culture of accepting injustice is not something that belongs only to the privileged class. It's not something that belongs only to the state. It is something in which entire society is complicit. And I had wanted to show you on my shared screen, I had wanted to show you a diagram, a very simple model of how these injustices are perpetrated by everybody in collusion. I'll see if I can pull that up. I'll try to share that screen. I had that picture on my presentation. But what I would like to highlight here is that our strategies have perhaps not looked as closely as they should have at the ways in which our own positions, our own behaviors, and our own internal ethical frameworks are somewhere colluding in these systems of oppression. So I'm again trying to share the screen. Please bear with me. Yeah, I think I can bring it up this time. Yeah. So what I have here is a very simple diagram to explain the system that creates social injustice. So these four squares over here, the two top squares represent the actions of individuals. The two bottom squares represent the actions of collective society or large groups. Similarly, these two left side squares represent what is invisible. It exists under the surface. We can't see it. Unless it shows to be revealed, you can't see it. Whereas these two squares on the right side are what we can see. They are explicit. So if you look at the top left square where my cursor is hovering, this is our inner worldview. This is what we hold inside our mind. It's our values, our beliefs, our ethical framework, self-image, worldview, all these things. And the point is that from childhood, we have all been conditioned to accept injustice. Please, will somebody switch on their mic and tell me what you're saying? I can't hear you. Will somebody please tell me what you're saying?
மதியவன் கொஞ்சம் சொல்லுங்களா உங்களுக்கு?
I can't hear. I'll just stop sharing the screen.
Okay.
I think somebody was saying you can't be heard. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's audible. We can hear you, ma'am.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear.
Yeah, we can hear you.
You are audible.
You shared screen, you couldn't hear.
Now, உங்களுக்கு தெரியுதாங்க? இல்ல எனக்கு.
இல்ல முடிஞ்சு. It's over. The screening is off.
No, I would have liked to speak, but I'll speak without it. Okay. So basically, our own worldviews and our own conditioning, for instance, to accept, oh, you could hear even when I shared the screen, but I saw Comrade Tyagu making I can't hear kind of gestures. So let me go back to the shared screen with you.
Okay.
So what we can see is that our own conditioning, for instance, I've given something that is very common. From childhood, we are conditioned to accept that if injustice happens to us, it's our own fault. It's my fate. I may have done something, if not, consciously, I may have done something unconsciously. I should see what I have done wrong rather than looking at what others may have done wrong. The other example I'm showing here is all of us within our minds, I think we have some ongoing conversation. We have a desire to respect tradition as well as a desire to follow modernity, to question, to challenge, and so on. And we see this conflict within ourselves when we look at how we are in the family and how we are in our activist life. So even those of us who fight for equality in our activist life, we find it most difficult to challenge inequality within the family. It is that sense that our world inside has a different set of norms and rules than the world outside. And if you come to the green square underneath, the collective square, you will, what we call our culture, and I'm showing you here examples of our culture today. What we call our culture is actually made up from the interaction of all these different worldviews. So there are people with traditional worldviews, many people in our families, as we have seen, the state, all of these, the dominant culture is formed from the interaction of these worldviews. And I've just put some points which I think are very much part of our dominant culture today. So one part of the dominant culture, very powerful narrative, is that national interest is defined by the interest of powerful. So criticizing the state holds the power to say that if we criticize the state, we are anti-national. Our big corporate houses hold the power to say that if we are criticizing them, we are criticizing the power of the nation. And the best example of that is Ambani wedding. Every conversation, whether on Twitter or social media, people who were criticizing the Ambani wedding were being abused and told that you are bringing down the image of the nation in the world. We also, powerful people, and we should be proud that we have a family which can celebrate a wedding where foreign film stars and dignitaries and all come for crores of rupees. So the power of a class, a capitalist class, becomes the power of the nation. And this has become part of our culture. Similarly, this culture of victimhood that is being used now to justify exclusion. Why should we not allow Bangladeshis or Bengali-speaking people to come and settle and farm in Assam? Why should we not allow Bengali speakers? No, no, no. They are Muslims. They will change the demography of that state. Why should we not give shelter to Rohingya refugees? No, no, no. They are Muslims. They'll come and take over our resources. Why should we exclude Muslims from government bodies, from decision-making bodies, and so on? No, no, no. We will become the minority. Hindus will become the minority. They will become majority and exploit us. So it's a false culture of victimhood that has become part of the cultural landscape today. The culture is also, not today, from a very many 100 years, maybe since independence, you can see that religious morality has always overridden constitutional morality. The Constitution may say that untouchability is, we will banish untouchability. There may be laws to stop untouchability, but there are people who are sitting in high offices as judges, as senior bureaucrats, as ministers, who for their family function will call a Brahmin cook. And they will justify saying, no, no, I'm not practicing untouchability. I'm only following the precept of my religion. You can see what is happening in UP now. They have passed a rule. They have passed an ordinance that everybody on the route of that Kavar Yatra, they have to put, all the shops have to put the names of the owner and of the workers. The Supreme Court has stayed that order today, but that is being justified on the same grounds, that it is to protect the religious rights of the majority community. So exclusion of a minority community is justified in terms of protecting the religious rights of the majority community. It's a completely lopsided logic that goes against constitutional norms, but which is justified in the name of culture and tradition and religious precepts. And what we are seeing is, again, always, this is not something new. Literature, films, music, books, everything has actually glamorized and validated this kind of notion of Indian culture. So patriarchal norms become Indian culture. Caste norms become Indian culture. Hindu norms become Indian culture. Myths perpetrated as history become Indian culture. And you can see that reflected in textbooks in the school. And if you see where it comes from, it comes directly from Bollywood. So this has become the shared cultural climate that supports and facilitates injustice, social injustice. So social injustice is made invisible by this culture. And there is a very shocking statistic from 2023, a survey conducted by an organization called Pew, which conducts these global surveys. I mean, we may have many problems with their methodology, but they did a big survey asking people from all castes and all religions, that single question, do you think caste discrimination exists in India? And less than 25% of people said, yes, caste discrimination exists. 75% of people, including people from the oppressed castes, including people from oppressed minorities, said, no, caste discrimination does not exist. So the extent to which it has been made invisible in the public view I think carries a strong message. And if you look at this orange square or red square, this invisibilization has happened through the state and by the state. So laws that reinforce othering have been passed. And the latest example, of course, is the law against interreligious marriage. The laws and rules that criminalize people who call out interreligious marriage, criminalize whistleblowers who complain about caste violence. So you will see that a charge of inciting caste and communal violence is filed against people who file complaints on caste violence. So actually the person who's criticizing the oppression becomes the criminal. Similarly, protest and dissent have been criminalized. So anyone who protests against the government, anyone who protests against, I mean, there were protests in Bombay against Ambani wedding. Those people were all hauled off by the police. Those roads were shut off. There were people who protest against declaring a military airport as a commercial airport for the Ram Temple consecration ceremony. That has been seen as a protest against a national, good thing happening at the national level. So dissent has been criminalized. Along with that, difference has also been criminalized. So one country, one this, one country, one dress, one country, one song, one country. Everything is like India is homogeneous. India has a homogeneous culture, and that culture is not just Hindu culture, it is upper caste North Indian Hindu culture. So-called Aryan culture has become rebranded as Indian culture. And all of this has been done by the state or with the support of the state. Many of us would feel that this has happened, this has been happening before as well, but now it has happened at a very fast pace, and it is openly supported. It is visible, it's explicit. There is no attempt to say this is constitutional. There's no reference to constitution. This is how it should be. So it's happening like that. And if you look at individual behavior also, you can see that it is the powerful groups, the groups that actually perpetrate injustice, that have set the standards for how things should be done. So, I mean, I'm speaking as a personal experience. We have very recently moved from Delhi to Coimbatore. I mean, I belong to a family from Kerala, but I'm born and brought up in the north. And only very recently we have moved to Coimbatore. And in the south, we are quite stunned to see that wedding customs of North Indian upper caste communities that you see in Bollywood films have become very much the norm, even in my community, the Nair community in Kerala, which claims to be very progressive and which claims to be very, non-discriminatory. So that standard set by, let's say, the Ambanis becomes the standard for everybody, because it is such a powerful image, and because we are seeing a very great willingness to support and submit this idea that the state will tell you what to do. The paternalistic state will set the standards. So whether we see one person as the face of that state, or whether we see all the organs of the state as the face of the state, the story is the same. You know, what comes down from above, what comes down from Delhi, all of us will do. We've seen during the lockdown, I mean, we have seen how blindly people everywhere were ringing bells and banging thali and lighting lamp to fight the virus. We cannot imagine that so many thousands of people will stand up at the same time across the country to protest against caste violence. In all our movements, we have tried to get mass protest. Recent times, mass protests that have happened, like the Shaheen Bagh protest, it is this criminalization of dissent. It is the criminalization of public expression of opinion, criminalization of freedom of speech. We have seen how they have been used to silence and suppress anybody who calls for justice. So I want to underline something that, Comrade Tyagu was mentioning, a meeting in Bangalore on human rights. Now, I wanted to emphasize that point again, Comrade Tyagu, that all the institutions which speak of human rights, which were set up to protect human rights, which are actually also the institutions which are supposed to protect and promote social justice, Commission for Children, Human Rights Commission, Women's Commission, SC/ST Commission, bodies, these economic commissions, all of them have become completely colored by this false narrative of injustice equals justice. So we have now reached the stage where this system has become so powerful that black has become white, white has become black. So the same Human Rights Commission, which was set up to protect human rights defenders, is now sitting quietly, watching silently as human rights defenders like the Bhima Koregaon 16, about which I know you have had a seminar, have been imprisoned. That same Human Rights Commission sat silently, without a word, as Father Stan Swami was dying. So this is the extent to which black has become white. So I just want to end by sharing with you some questions that have been raised around questions of social justice by women's movements. Because I don't see a separation between women's movement, human rights movement, caste equality movement, Adivasi movement, self-determination movements. I don't see a separation between them. They are all movements for social justice. They are all movements for human rights. They are all movements for constitutional values. And they are all movements that challenge this system. So some questions that we have raised from women's movements, I want to raise here and share here. One thing that we have been struggling with across women's movements is, how do we build solidarity across these identities? How do we recognize that this system operates in the same way against caste? It operates in the same way to support patriarchy. It operates in the same way to support neoliberal extractive economy. It operates in the same way to support majoritarianism, to support militarism, to support this militaristic and exclusive view of nationalism, we are all fighting the same system from different points. What will it take for us to come together and to be able to show solidarity, act in solidarity with each other across these differences of identity? The other question that is actually an even bigger question that is linked to the first one. How can we obliterate and wipe out this boundary between personal and public? How can we show people, how can we convince people that the inequality and injustice that we see in public starts within the private space of the home, starts within the protected space of marriage, of parenthood, of child rearing? How can we convince people about this? And that's a huge task, because our entire culture is to show the home, the family, the religion as a sacred space that nobody has the right to question. How can we bring our politics of challenge and resistance into a wider space? I mean, we can't ignore the fact that even in an election that has changed the political face of political reality in India, even in this election, how many parties were there who nominated women? How many parties were there who nominated, 30% for outside the quota? I think it's a matter of great pride that Samajwadi Party actually nominated a Dalit for a general constituency. But how many parties were able to do this? How many parties who are criticizing the right wing for not nominating Muslims, how many Muslims have they nominated? So this looking inwards is also very much part of wiping off this boundary between private and public. For parties and movements also, this is the same logic, that what we do in public as a movement is separate from what we do in private as a party or a movement within our movement. And of course, this is where the issue of violence comes in most strongly. We all have strong positions on public violence. We have actually, as movements, as social justice actors, come together to condemn, for instance, Rohit Vemula's suicide, to condemn the instances of caste discrimination in public spaces like this Kawad Yatra, or in IITs and IIMs. We have come together. But what will it take for us to turn a similarly sharp lens on our own movements, to question our own practices and frameworks within our movements and parties? And I think what we in the women's movements are realizing is all of this needs the privileged, for people within movements to acknowledge their own privileges. This is the most painful part. And within the women's movement, we have seen women's movements breaking up on questions like, for instance, why are the leaderships of women's movements predominantly women, urban, upper caste, upper class women still? Why are urban, upper class, upper caste people still the spokespersons still the representatives of many movements. Even within movements of underprivileged groups, why do people who live in Delhi get the most exposure as spokespersons? I mean, these questions of looking inwards at our own privilege have been the most painful thing, and we know that they can destroy movements. We know that they can destroy individuals. Yet, I would like to bring this to you as something that the women's movement and feminist movement is realizing, has realized, that without going through these painful process of acknowledging our own privilege and of learning how to give up that privilege, of not counting on it even when we don't realize. Without that, it may be, probably we may win elections, but will we really be able to transform a system that for hundreds of years, it has got hundreds of years of practice in creating injustice. And creating injustice and not only making it look invisible, but actually making it look desirable.